So remember, my name is Tawnya Papin.
My name is Tawnya Papin.
Welcome to Synergy on Record.
Welcome to Synergy on Record. We're talking about helping people's confidence, and you're knocking mine, so that's great.
Synergy on Record, episode 8. We lost the clacker.
Welcome, everybody. See, it already happened. Every time, it never fails. Welcome, everyone, to Synergy on Record. This is episode 8. I'm Tawnya, Synergy Labs Marketing Director, and today I'm joined by Mary Ritter of Tasmy Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the first time that I've met Mary. I was just learning about her business, and it is a fascinating practice that fits in really well with what we're doing at Synergy Labs. So for those that might be listening today, Mary, maybe take a minute to kind of introduce yourself and what it is that Tasmy Consulting does.
Okay, so my name is Mary K. Ritter, and my background is in teaching communication and specifically teaching English as a second language to international students and international professionals. So my colleagues, like me, we all met at NYU, New York University, where we were training international students to do masters and PhDs in the United States. And we've since formed a consultancy that helps international professionals thrive in the North American workplace and helps North American workplaces get the best out of their international professionals. So we help both sides communicate better with one another.
Amazing. So this fell very naturally for us. For those of you that are familiar with our Talent Track program, Synergy Lab offers Canadian employers an opportunity to fill labor gaps through this offering by hiring international skilled workers to come to Canada and work for them. So right now we're focused primarily on healthcare, personal support workers in the trucking and logistics industries, but the world is our oyster, and that will soon be expanded. So this is just such a natural fit for us. And we are so passionate about internationals and how they fit into the Canadian workplace. In your opinion, Mary, what is the benefit of internationals coming into the Canadian workforce? What can they contribute?
So there are so many things, right? Yeah. So first of all, we have these gaps. We have this aging population, for example, that we can bring in people from other parts of the world who have training that we need, that fills gaps that we have. What's not to like about that?
Yeah.
Right? They're often very highly trained, very diligent. We taught so many talented students and international professionals who had just amazing skills and appetite for knowledge. And sometimes they had really, also wonderful, people skills, an ability to connect with others. So, we can bring them in, they can fill these labor gaps, but they also contribute a unique perspective that maybe we were missing. So they can fill in other kinds of gaps that, for example, an employer might not have thought about. Not only do they know their own culture, right? So let's say you are marketing, and you never thought about marketing to a Spanish-speaking audience,
right?
But maybe they can give you some insight into, well, this would work better if you're trying to appeal to a Spanish-speaking customer, for example.
Yeah.
Not only that, but they often have, their cultures often have practices or traditions that contribute something that maybe we don't have, or maybe we've lost. They can they may make assumptions differently than we do. And just seeing that, of course, it causes problems, but it can also trigger insights where you have these flashes of insight. You're like, oh, I didn't think of doing it that way. I never thought of it in that particular way.
Yeah.
And that can spark innovation.
Yeah.
And we all need to innovate because the times are changing so quickly. And we need to innovate for global audiences. So to have that in-house expertise
Yes.
that offers that global perspective. I mean, how is that not a win-win?
Yeah, totally. And we're always moving so quickly. So having those people there to kind of force you to slow down for a moment, to come up with the ideas to help you innovate and just step back. And yeah, I love that. So what are some of the key strategies that you advise on to help these internationals successfully integrate into their new positions in North America?
Well, it's hard to know what you don't know,
Sure.
right? So I think it's useful to start with that perspective. There are just going to be things that you don't know that you didn't know.
Yeah.
And so it's a generic answer, but asking questions is extremely important. And you don't necessarily need to ask your employer because that might be fraught with some, I don't know, embarrassment or face-saving concerns. But one thing that you can do is try to find your cultural interpreter. You know, come to where you're going to be and try to find a person to whom you can say, hey, this happened and I didn't really understand it and I felt weird. And what do you think about that? Mm-hmm. And sometimes they can say, oh yeah, it just doesn't happen in that way here. Like it happens in this way. And, you know, you get that person that, you know, you can think of them as, you know, helping remove stones from your path, something like that, or helping you interpret events that you know that something's off, but you don't exactly know what. Mm-hmm. So having a cultural interpreter or the mentor,
Yeah.
I think is extremely important. Having the ability to ask questions. You can also, I also think people are too hard on themselves in the sense that they tend to think it's all on them. Oh, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do all this work of understanding, you know, the other and learning the other's language and adapting to this culture. But if we're inviting you here to fill a gap, then there's also some onus on, you know, the employer and the society that is accepting you. And you can ask for some accommodations and you can ask for the kind of support that you need. And I think people don't do that enough. You can ask for more global English to be spoken at your organization, for example. You can say, you know, I'm not really familiar with baseball. If we could use other or additional analogies when we talk about business, that would be helpful to me. If you could slow down when you run meetings, or if you could distribute the agenda ahead of time instead of at the meeting, then I would have time to read it ahead of time. Like, there are all kinds of little accommodations that you can ask for that I think internationals often are too, modest or too self-effacing is not exactly the right word, but they take on too much of the burden, and that burden needs to be shared.
Yes.
By the society and the employers as well.
Absolutely.
So, and there's a lot that can be done on both sides, and understanding is a two-person game.
Yeah.
So
no, that's so true. And in any situation, right? I mean, prior to the cameras starting, we were talking about, you had mentioned that oftentimes companies will come to you when they're experiencing a challenge, but listening to you speak, it sounds like there would be so much more benefit in them having you as a partner before that relationship between employer and international employee even starts, so they can prepare themselves and be ready for these things as they come up.
Yes, and that's something that we're actually pushing for.
Yeah.
You know, if it's very expensive for a company to make the wrong hire.
Yes.
So if you have screening in place that can screen for the kinds of things that you actually need the person to do. Let's say you need the person to take independent meetings. Okay, well, do they have the meeting skills to do that? It's not the sort of thing that's easily tested in an interview,
Yeah.
right? You know, why don't you set up the interview so that you see the person work through a series of tasks in a, semi-real life scenario?
Yeah.
Right? What if we can give the kind of English language proficiency assessment that would really test what it is that you want to know? Like, do they have enough English to do X, Y, and Z for my company?
Yes.
Right? Like all of that, the screening process is very important. But after people get into your business, of course, the training process could be it could be transformative,
Yeah.
right, for a new employee.
Well, and I'm sure that having those practices in place too helps the international employee feel more welcomed, feel like the employer is taking an interest in them being there and helping build that sense of community amongst the team. So I totally see the benefit of having those things in place from the get-go. Are there other things that you encourage employers to do to help kind of foster that sense of community?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing can replace a good old-fashioned social event.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A no pressure social event, right? The holiday parties.
Yeah.
The Saturday picnic kind of thing, that where there isn't really pressure, but there is an opportunity to socialize in in a kind of warm way.
Yeah.
Right. And, of course we, network when we go to meetings and conferences, but that's different than socializing.
Right.
Socializing is different than networking.
It's less formal, maybe.
And there's some kind of warmth.
Yes.
Right. In the
Yeah.
atmosphere, and sharing food,
Yeah.
like actually sitting down and sharing food. And that's so important to so many people in their cultures. So there's no replacement for that.
Yeah.
Like that needs to happen. And it's, and I think that employers sometimes think, well, we do the whatever their holiday is, their holiday.
Yeah.
Well, we nod to that, or, we have Cultural Diversity Day on January 6th or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's all fine and good. But, did you know that you could train all of your managers and executives to be more sympathetic listeners to international professionals? It isn't just on the international to learn how to listen to us. We could also learn how to listen to them better, and it's remarkably easy. If you teach people, hey, here are some common sounds that you're going to hear from a typical Mandarin speaker. Okay, and if you hear this and you can change it in your mind to this, if you can make these 5 substitutions, or if you can recognize these 5 patterns, you will have a much easier time listening to anyone with Mandarin accented English.
Interesting.
And it's like a 2-hour training. Like,
Right.
It's so easy, and it reduces that friction of like having to listen to someone whose sounds you're not used to. And it's friction, like it's real. It's you're not being intolerant because you find it difficult to listen to what sounds to you to be accented speech. Right? That's not you being insufficiently diverse.
Right.
That's real friction that can be mitigated through, training and exercise. So training for both sides in communication skills, in listening to each other. Let's see, in things like speaking directly, if that's actually what you want in your organization, or maybe speaking more indirectly if that's a norm in your organization, right? People fall along and cultures fall along a continuum of directness and indirectness in communication. And just knowing where you would like your organization to be and then trying to get people to conform to that, that's very useful.
Yeah.
You know, and it's partly about being explicit about this is what we do in our organization.
Mm-hmm.
And here's how we would like you to do it, but you have to be very explicit about what you expect.
Yeah.
Because the assumptions that we make they're just not intuitive for people who have grown up in other cultures.
Yeah, I mean, earlier you had shared such a simple example of business etiquette and just being very direct with what may seem very rudimentary to us, but important for internationals who are coming from a different world. So, I mean, when you step back and think about it like that, it's like, oh yeah, you know, it's so important to communicate. And it sounds like Tasmy is really the organization that can help bring all of that together to ensure success on both sides. So this is fascinating for me and to hear you talking about, because it just fits in so naturally with what we're doing at Synergy. Do you ever have hesitancies or barriers expressed by employers or employees really about the idea of either employers hiring internationally or internationals coming to North America? Like, do you?
Sure. Yeah. There's hesitancy on both sides, and there should be.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a very big step for someone to leave their home country and come to a new country. Mm-hmm. That's enormous.
Yeah.
And and for an employer who has always been used to working with people from his or her own home culture, you know, to invite in people who will have different standards, habits, rituals, associations. Of course, that's a risk on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, the question is about, well, how do we recognize those risks? So we have to be able to speak openly about it.
Yeah.
We can't be so tender and delicate,
right,
that, you know, we're not going to mention that there's friction,
right,
between cultures.
Yeah.
And there are different ways of going about things that are not, it doesn't all flow together seamlessly. Mm-hmm. Like there are different people do things in different ways, and sometimes those are incompatible.
Yeah.
So recognizing that and yet, right? And yet,
mm-hmm.
Bringing people together to make something that didn't exist before. And there's transformations that have to happen on both sides.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can make something that maybe hasn't been made before. And, you know, you can bake a pie that has like wild ingredients and it turns out great.
Yeah. I love that analogy. Awesome. Maybe just to kind of wrap this all up, do you have a success story or an interaction that you had that really left an impact on you that kind of makes you passionate about what you do that you could share?
Oh, it's so fun.
Yeah.
To work with internationals. What's fun? Like the most fun thing for me actually is seeing them learning a new language, learning a new culture is actually mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. Like it actually, it wakes up parts of your brain that you didn't even know were asleep. And seeing people, you know, they'll come and they'll describe something that happened and they don't really understand, you know, what went wrong. And then you kind of say, well, could it have been this? And you ask more questions, of course. And could it have been this? And do you tend to think of it this way? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, often a North American would tend to think of it this way. And you just see them go, oh, like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, I love that.
Yeah.
That's so fun because they didn't even think that that was within the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, that's fun. That's not a particular success story. Like a particular success story is, I've been working, for example, with this woman from Brazil who has had a lot of trouble following along and listening in meetings.
Okay.
Just the pace of speech is very fast.
Yes.
For her, and she didn't realize the connections that need to be made between. When we speak, we think that we're speaking in separate words because we're used to reading on the page, but we don't. We speak connectedly, and all of the words run together. And if I say Captain Nate, am I saying Captain 8 or, Capta and Nate, right? Like, people don't know where those divisions are actually between words, right?
Yeah.
So helping her decode that stream of language and turn it in her mind into separate words has allowed her to, she's actually now interviewing for other positions.
Okay.
But it's helped her actually get a grasp on what the interview questions are that she's being asked. Yeah. And so, she's coming to the end of a long string of interviews, and I am waiting on tenterhooks to hear the success story of where she finally lands. But that's so fun.
Yeah.
Like it's it's great to see people's proficiency expand, and then of course their opportunities expand.
Yeah.
And their world expands.
Well, and she probably went into that interview process with so much more confidence, knowing how to decode that language barrier that she was experiencing before she had the opportunity to meet with you. So that's really cool. Do you have any advice for employers who are looking to hire internationals?
Yes. So I think screen carefully. That is the first thing. That's not being harsh.
Yeah.
That's being discerning. So that's important. And I think really thinking about when you get someone in, face saving is a very important facet of many cultures. And so, what are those opportunities where you can talk to someone in private instead of calling them out in a more public, meeting forum or something like that, right? How can you talk to the person one-on-one or get them information privately? Also, there should be a similar channel for them. Can they actually get messages to you anonymously? Is there any way to have anonymous feedback come back to you? That's extremely important, I think, for employers.
Yeah.
They don't realize how difficult it is, particularly in cultures in which hierarchy is more marked than in ours.
Yeah.
They don't really realize how difficult it is for a subordinate whom they think of as just being here, but the subordinate might think of themselves as being here, how difficult it is to ask questions, to make requests. Some kind of anonymous feedback or request mechanism is really helpful. Face-saving opportunities, training in this is the culture. You don't necessarily have to do this is Canadian culture. You could do this is the culture of our workplace.
Yeah.
This is how we do meetings.
Yeah.
These are our email expectations.
Yes.
These are our eating expectations. This is how you don't explain to most people this is how we use our lunchroom.
Right.
And you might feel a bit silly doing it, but do it.
Yeah.
Do it anyway. You'd be surprised what the norms are in other places.
Yes.
Being explicit about all of that. And then also I think when you're dealing with people for whom English is not their first language, we tend to fill up awkward moments.
Yep.
We tend to fill up that space.
Yep.
And we might even assume that if you're pausing, you didn't understand, maybe you didn't hear me, maybe I'll say it again. And then you're still pausing, so I'll say it again, maybe a slightly different way. Now I'm starting to feel nervous. How much do you understand me, really?
Yeah.
Why am I going on at length? Why do I have to go on at length?
Yes.
It's like, okay. Other cultures and linguistic traditions, sometimes some of them have longer wait times.
Yeah.
That's built in. Even if everyone understands the same language, there are longer and shorter wait times. Okay, so there's that. And then most people, when they're dealing in an environment that's not their own, need a little extra wait time anyway.
Yeah.
Ask your question. And
Breathe.
You breathe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let it land.
Yeah.
Let them think about it. If they don't understand it, maybe let them ask a question. I understood the beginning of your sentence, but not the end.
Right.
I understood everything except that word that you said. What was that? Synergy?
Right.
Right? So let them maybe ask the part that they didn't understand instead of assuming they didn't understand, and then, getting in there to fill in the gap.
So interesting. And the more that I'm listening to you speak, like, I already realized, obviously, that having these types of things in place is critical because we work so closely with internationals. But I myself have experienced moments of trying to communicate with our clients and it being difficult, or, seeing that some of our clients are very hesitant to engage at all because they're concerned that they're not going to be able to communicate with me, or they might be afraid to ask questions if they're in the audience of a group of people because there might be that maybe fear of embarrassment of not being able to get their point across. So this is just all, I see the importance so much and so clearly.
And if I can jump in.
Yeah.
Like, those are just some of the interpretations you could make.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe I'm hesitating because in my culture, when someone gives a speech, we don't ask questions.
Right.
That's to suggest that the speaker left something out.
Right.
Whereas how could you not ask questions? And, I would feel like a failure if I gave a speech and no one had any questions.
Yes.
in the tradition that I'm used to.
Interesting.
Right? But you don't even, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't even know all of the available interpretations of an act as simple as they're not raising their hand.
Yeah.
They're not asking questions. They look like they're hesitating.
Yeah.
Could be any number of possibilities, right?
Yeah.
And all of those could be, we tend to jump in and think, well, maybe it was there must have been this, But anyway, it was difficult. So, right? And I think that that's very natural, and we have to recognize that and not feel, not make ourselves feel terrible about that. That kind of friction is understandable.
Yeah.
We can do something about it.
Yeah. So I know we're getting ready to wrap up here, but I'm just so curious. More questions are coming to mind. So when you're working with an employer preemptively before they've hired an international, or maybe at the start of that employee's journey, do you put together a training calendar type of thing where there's specific modules that you walk them through, or is it kind of on a case-by-case basis based on what that employer is experiencing?
Yeah. So all of our work is custom. So it is on a case-by-case basis. But one thing that we do we do often give is a language assessment.
Okay.
And we can customize it to the employer's specific workplace. But that you first need to really assess whether someone has the communication skills to do the things that you want them to do. And that can be done through various kinds of assessment, but not just like a weak online test. You have to talk to a person.
Yeah.
You have to see how they speak and listen in real time.
Yeah.
So that's something that we often, that's a little more standard that we do with employers.
Yeah.
And then as for training, we can we could train people for an hour or we can train them for a year.
Yeah.
So those are wildly different.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Kinds of trainings. But there are things that that move the needle more than others. And one of them is that piece about hierarchy. Understanding what is your sense of hierarchy in this context. Maybe it's an organizational context, and understanding what that sense of hierarchy would be for the person coming from another culture.
Right.
It's like that has so many knock-on effects.
Yeah.
That will massively impact how they interact with their managers. If they interact with their
Right.
managers.
Yeah.
Right. That will impact how they communicate with people whom they perceive to be above them and people whom they perceive to be below them.
Right.
Those can be wildly different forms of communication.
Yeah.
That can impact how much risk they're willing to take.
Yeah.
There's too much perceived gap. We call it high power distance for me to innovate or for me to take risks.
Yeah.
To try things out, because the consequences of failure are perceived by let's say I'm the newcomer. They're perceived as too drastic.
Yeah.
And then now you have like a wonderful resource, a highly trained resource, whom you've got on a leash, and they're not you're not necessarily leasing their innovation because they're worried
Right.
about the consequences.
Right.
And so that's a problem for businesses.
Yeah. Listening to you talk reminds me of, there's one saying that I always live by, and that is, our perception is our reality. And I mean, that's very much so what you just explained. And international is having these feelings of how they might be perceived if they do this or if they do that. But if the employer had taken the initiative to kind of address what the expectations are and how things should be approached, then they might not have that same perception, and then would be willing to contribute more, leading to innovation and success on both sides.
Yeah,
So,
you don't necessarily know the context from which they've come, but many of those, in my experience, are not favorable towards risk taking. So, that means that you might get an employee who looks to you not to be at all proactive.
Yeah.
That's because they're waiting to be told what to do within a narrow frame.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not why you need them. Maybe you need them to be, more proactive or taking more risks or trying things out or problem solving.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You need to know what you expect from your employee in order to, to get the best out of him or her. So
Absolutely.
So it's on, it's on both sides. It's very much, it should very much be on an employer's mind.
Yeah.
I think.
Absolutely. Awesome. This has been great. For anybody that's watching or listening, where can they go to learn more about Tasmy?
Oh, we're like everyone else online at tasmyconsulting.com. So you can go there, and it has all of our information and all of the things that we like to do. And you can reach me on LinkedIn at Mary K. Ritter also.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary, so much for joining me today. And thanks to everyone for listening in, as always. We're happy to be here. If you want to reach out to Synergy Lab, you can find us on all of the same platforms that Mary is on, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, email, synergylab.ca if you're interested in learning more about the Talent Track program. Until next time, we'll see you then. Chat soon.